All right, hello everyone. I see that we have a few people in the audience as well, which I'm glad to see. I am Casey Fiesler. I am the Adjunct Chair for Community Engagement here for the SIGCHI Executive Committee. Sorry, I'm looking for my headphones as I realize that you can probably hear all of my notifications. Welcome to our, I think this is our fourth Ask Me Anything session. You might notice that we're set up a little bit differently this time. We have this set up as a webinar so that you can easily see everyone at the same time, including our sign language interpreter who has joined us, and our recording will have her visible as well as all of our panelists here. I'm going to drop real quick in the comment section here the link to Slido where you can leave questions if you have not already. And also we can take questions live, and I can make you a panelist so that everyone can see you if you would like to talk. And we also have a Q&A section here with the webinar, which you're welcome to pop questions into as well. All right, well, first, let me start by having our panelists introduce themselves. Vino, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. So my name is Vinoba Vinayagamoorthy. You can call me Vino, like wine. I am an adjunct chair for equity with Adriana, who will be introducing herself as well. I also am on the steering committee for a smaller conference called Interactive Media Experiences, as the VP for conferences. In my day job, I am a project engineer with the R&D department of the BBC.
Great, thank you. Adriana?
You need to unmute, Adriana.
Okay, bingo. So yes, hi everybody. I'm Adriana Vivacqua, and I am also an adjunct chair of equity, along with Vino. And I am a professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And I also serve in the steering committee for a smaller conference called Group.
Great, thank you. And Gloria?
Hello, everybody. I'm Gloria Mark. I am the adjunct chair for awards. I've been involved in SIGCHI for many years. In 2017, I was general chair for the CHI conference. In 2006 and 2012, I was technical program chair for CSCW conference. I've been the papers chair for the group conference a long time ago. This is my third year as adjunct chair for awards. And my day job is as a professor at University of California, Irvine.
Great, thank you, Gloria. And I suppose I should also have introduced myself. I am Casey Fiesler, and I'm an assistant professor at University of Colorado in Boulder. So I can see here all of the questions that have been submitted previously on Slido. As I said before, you can also ask questions live. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand here in Zoom with the raise hand function, or if you like, you can use the chat and say that you would like to ask a question. But I will start off with questions that are in Slido. So the first one, and I think this is targeted at Gloria, as it is about awards. across the years, the awards seem very skewed to people in the US relative to other places. Are there any strategies in place to try to better reflect the international diversity of SIGCHI contributions?
Okay, so thank you for the question. It's a very important question, and we do recognize it as a problem. It's something that we have been working on. So the problem actually has different facets. So one facet is that it's a pipeline problem. So first of all, we need to bring more people into the community who are diverse. That's a basic problem that I think everyone realizes. In terms of the awards, it's a problem in terms of nominations. So we need to get more diverse nominations. So I would encourage you, in fact, we're trying to encourage everyone to nominate a wide set of people who are very diverse, because we're just not seeing these nominations coming in that we should be seeing. To that end, we have tried to make the committees more diverse. So, committee members have a 3-year tenure. So a lot of the committee membership that you're seeing are people who have already been in place for several years, and they should be rotating out for next year. So it gives us an opportunity to bring new people into the position. The Social Impact Award Committee is new, and you're not seeing the new membership on the website just yet. So we're waiting for that to get updated, and it should be hopefully any day. But that is a fairly diverse committee. We have people who have membership from, I think it's University of Cape Town, South Africa. We have someone who's also working in Africa at Microsoft Research. We have another person who had worked for quite some time in India, and the chair is Leisha Palin. So, we're making these changes as positions open up on committees, and as we can replace them, we're trying to replace them with people who are more diverse, who represent different parts of the world. But you're absolutely right that awards have traditionally overrepresented people from North America, and we're trying to change that.
Wonderful, thank you, Gloria. And Vino or Adriana, if you have anything to say also with respect to any of these questions, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Gloria. I think there's a very good sort of start of getting people into the committee who are diverse, and that hopefully helps bring out the visibility of people we've not seen in communities that we want to encourage to join SIGCHI. And hopefully in time that improves, but the question is a very valid question, and we hope to work on it as we go along.
Thank you. And also, Stacy has helpfully pasted the link to the call for award nominations in the chat here. The deadline has been extended to December 11th, and so we will continue to try to get the word out as broadly as we can about nominations for these awards. All right, let me go ahead and ask another question that's related to awards to sort of keep these together. So this one just came in. According to the ACM SIGCHI conflict of interest policy, a person who is being considered for an award should remove him or herself from the awards committee. This policy has not been respected in the recent SIGCHI chapter website competition. So how is the SIGCHI EC addressing conflicts of interest?
So I'm not sure what the questioner is referring to. So in terms of SIGCHI awards, a person on on a committee is eligible for award on a different committee. They're not eligible for award on the same committee. So I'm not sure what kind of awards the questioner is referring to. But, you know, we have had situations in the past where there have been conflicts of interest among committee members and people who are nominated. And I have to say, for a committee like Chi Academy, it's very hard to avoid, to not have conflicts of interest, because, you know, it's not a very big social network, and everybody kind of has some connection with people in some form or another. So it's very hard to avoid that. So what happens in those cases is that the committee member recuses themselves from discussion of the nominee, and they're not part of that decision process. But, you know, it's like, in the United States, we have National Science Foundation panels that determine awards. I know in a lot of other countries, there are national science foundations who have very similar processes. And it's the same kind of process that occurs, that if you have a conflict of interest with someone who has submitted a proposal, you recuse yourself and you're not part of that discussion. And so we follow the same kinds of practices. But as I heard the question, it seems to be related to SIGCHI chapters. So I'm not sure exactly what this question is addressing.
Yeah, it does. It specifically looks at the SIGCHI chapter website competition, and Eunice is our VP for chapters. So I'm not certain what the exact issue is, but if you want to reach out to one of us, Adriana or myself, I'm happy to take the issue in and post it to Eunice anonymously if you wish, and try and get to the meat of the problem, so to speak.
And also, Neha points out in the comments, but it looks like perhaps this was asked and looked into and perhaps addressed for that competition. However, also we're having an AMA, and the date hasn't been announced yet. It probably will be today. I think it's going to be November 23rd, which is next Monday. So this could be also a question for that AMA, which will include the VP for chapters. But also, I will make sure that this question gets passed on to the right people. But also, it's good to address that conflict of interest issue generally. Okay, so one more question related to awards, and I will note this is about Best Paper Awards. So I will also let Gloria address sort of how those come into play here. But the comment in question is that unfortunately awards have become a game that only a few know how to play. This is true across various conferences. This is fine. However, we should not create a narrative that awarded papers are the best scholarship in the conference. Instead of calling it a Best Paper Award, we could find some other name for these awards. Not all Best Paper honorable mentions are truly great paper. There are many great papers, and the authors just didn't know how to play the game, or were not as well connected or famous, or didn't come from privileged institutions or backgrounds. The best paper narrative is dangerous for good science. It excludes great research done by others. So what's the plan to make this as fair, unbiased, and an inclusionary process?
Okay, so thanks for the question. So first of all, I want to point out that this question would fall under the purview of conference chairs for individual conferences, but I'm going to go ahead and answer it. Having been general chair and technical program chair of conferences in the past. So typically what's done, and this is what's done at the the CHI conference and CSCW is that reviewers and ACs can nominate a paper to be considered for best paper. Okay, so it's a free nomination process, and the reasoning by having reviewers and ACs nominate papers is that these are the people most familiar with the paper. So the process starts with the reviewers and the ACs. That's important to know. And then the paper chairs or technical program chairs will appoint a committee. It's a best paper committee. And these are individuals who will read all of these papers that have been nominated for best paper, and then they will discuss them. So it's not any single individual who makes this decision, but it's actually a group decision that's done in a committee. So what do committees look for in best papers? Well, that's, you know, there is a basic criterion, you know, innovation, originalness, originality, and so on. But every committee has their own interpretation of how these criteria are applied. I would disagree with you by saying that the best papers are not the best papers. I would say there can be misses. Absolutely. There have been misses. There have been papers that should have been best papers that didn't get chosen. There have been best papers that were chosen that probably shouldn't have. But I would say on the whole, I feel from my experience in conferences that best paper committees do a reasonably good job of selecting high quality papers. The competition is tough. There are a lot of papers that get nominated for best papers, and they're all really quite good. And sometimes it's just really tough to figure out which should get the best paper, which should get honorable mention. And the ACM imposes a constraint in that the top 1% of papers can be best papers, the top 5% can be honorable mention, which means there's a constraint of how many papers can be chosen as best papers and honorable mention. So to the extent that the individual who raised the question believes this is not a fair process, or that the papers chosen do not reflect best quality papers, this is something that should be brought up, I would say, it should be brought up to the steering committee of different conferences and discussed, and we could even elevate it and have it as a SIGCHI discussion, if, you know, but I'm also not sure to what extent this view is shared widely among people. You know, I don't know if, because I've not heard this complaint before. So, you know, I would like to hear more if this is a concern that a lot of people are raising, or is this a you know, concern that just a few individuals raise?
I'll also add, because I was just awards chair for CSCW, that inclusion was definitely something that we were trying to think hard about. And there are a few things that we are trying for CSCW. One is that unlike in the past, we have made it so that individual reviewers can nominate papers as opposed to just ACs, which is sometimes how it's done in some conferences, in order to try to increase the pool of papers that are being considered. We also have, for CSCW, instituted some recognitions that are not technically awards by ACM's definition of awards, because that's a very specific thing. So we have recognition, we've had for a few years a recognition for contributions to diversity and inclusion. And this year we have added recognitions for methods and for impact that we are trying out this year. We also had a very large awards committee this year because there were so many papers nominated because of this, over 70 papers nominated for various things, which meant that we had to do the process quite differently. And we're trying some new things this year, and anything that we learn, particularly that might contribute to more inclusion and equity, we will definitely share with other conferences as recommendations for what other places might try as well. Okay, so let me move on to quite a general question. And this is a two-parter, but I think we can do both of them at once. So the first question is, what does equity mean to you? And then what does the past, present, and future of equity look like for SIGCHI? So Vino or Adriana, do either one of you want to take that to start?
Do you want to go first, Adriana? Why?
Be my guest.
Okay. So to me, equity means that anyone who wants to take part in a conference or an award competition or a journal or any of the sort of academic research committees, academic research activities, are not given barriers that are unfair in comparison to others. So it also means the sense of having open communication and transparency in order to bubble up those issues, to recognize that there are some issues that are more inherent to smaller groups of people or different groups of people, and that we take those into account when we set up policies and procedures. Do you want to add to that, Adriana?
Yeah, actually, it's along the same lines, I guess. So enabling maybe everybody to participate in a fair way, and recognizing that people have maybe different backgrounds or different, they're coming from different places, and how do we make it possible for these people to take part in whatever it is, the community or the experiences in the conferences, and not have different standards towards them, or not be disadvantaged because they're coming from a different place, maybe.
And in terms of the past, present, and future of equity in SIGCHI, I'm going to take SIGCHI as the organization as a whole, as opposed to the conference CHI in general. But for SIGCHI, for me at least, it's essentially a chance to make SIGCHI a bit more global and inclusive, so that we don't have a pot of researchers or practitioners from one particular country taking a hold of the whole organization and setting policies and procedures that might not be quite in taking into consideration the issues that are there globally. And so it's sort of improving all the issues that Gloria talked about in terms of pipeline and getting folks to come in, getting more visibility for what I'm sure is very good work happening elsewhere that we just don't quite see because we have these barriers in place that we are not looking at and not improving on.
Yeah, and I want to echo that feeling actually, and saying that to me, it's also like I see a more global vision. And if there are pockets or regions or whatever that are underrepresented, or groups that are underrepresented, to try to figure out why these groups are underrepresented. And in a way, instead of expecting them to come to us, maybe we can go to them. And find them and figure out that there's good research being done in different pockets, and what can be done to reach out to them and to make them want to join us and come to SIGCHI. And maybe they're not even aware that SIGCHI exists. They're doing their own thing somewhere else.
And to this effect, we've started working with Eunice, who is the VP of chapters, and Xiaowen, who is with the team inclusion teams that we have with SIGCHI to try and improve and essentially find out what the issues are. And we encourage you to get in touch with us to start those conversations, open those conversations and see what is possible, what's not, and simply to be aware of the issues as well.
Great, thank you. As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question live, you can use the raise hand function, and I can promote you to a panelist so that you will show up on the screen. Or if you would like me to read your question out, you could either add it to the Slido, which I just gave a link to here, or you can use the Q&A and ask a question that way, and I will just read it out for you. And the Slido questions are anonymous. All right, and so let me go ahead and ask one from there that we got before this session. So the question is, what are the current demographics by gender, race, LGBTQIA+, et cetera, for ACM membership, SIGCHI membership, submissions, accepted papers, attendance, and if you do not have such data, why not? Who wants to take this?
I can start. So that's a multi-parter as well. So yes, there's a lot of data that we'd like to have. So there are issues pertaining to data ownership. For instance, ACM membership, that's ACM collects it and they don't necessarily share it with us. It's ACM data. So they might not be at liberty to share these data with us. For SIGCHI membership, we just got some data from ACM and we will be looking through it to see what it looks like. It's a bit confusing the way that the spreadsheets are set up. But yeah, we just gotten it for the first time ever. We had not had this data before. And as far as, I'm assuming SIGCHI submissions and acceptance and attendance, that all refers to all the conferences across the board. So there are 24 conferences involved in the SIGCHI conference family, so to speak. And so each conference collects data as it prefers to do. So they have their own practices and we don't centralize. Again, there's an issue of who owns this data. So we can't just requisition it and we're not even sure that they are collecting this data. So basically we don't have this data right now. Anyway.
And you know, some of the data is sensitive as well. So there are questions asked about whether we want to be able to collect these data. So I understand the need to see if, you know, if we are diverse enough, if we have enough representation from different parties, but then you have the question of, you know, what counts as an equal or rather diverse participation in one conference compared to the other. And like Adriana has already said, if one organization like the ACM collects the data for their own particular purposes, it's not, in Europe, for instance, we've got GDPR, so it's not really ethical for them to then give that data over. And so there are issues around that. In terms of the CHIs, the conference submission and acceptance papers and attendance, for instance, there are some bits of data floating around. So there's whatthehci.com where you can go and see which country has the most first authors in it, and that goes back for a bit. And also, if you go to the sigchi.org website, we have the conference history where you can see if there are student membership, what percentages have ACM memberships and things like that, which are a little bit easier to pin out the membership sort of details. But you also see budgets and those sort of information for a lot of the conferences that SIGCHI is taking care of. But yes, it's not quite a easy, straightforward way of figuring out how to collect that set of data, and even if it is the right way, or if it's the right thing to do to collect those data pieces. So, as ever, we are open to suggestions on how we might go about tracking the issue of diversity across our conferences. Feel free to send them in.
Farida, I see that you have your hand raised, so I am going to temporarily promote you to panelist so that you can give your comment or question. Go ahead. I'm not sure if you're trying to talk, but you're muted. Or if you would rather, you can type something in the chat or the Q&A here, and I will pass it along while you're figuring this out. All right, let me pop you back out for now to keep our grid smaller. But feel free to ask your question, etc. So we have one more question in the Slido that I can pass on here while everyone is thinking about whether you have comments or questions for us. Here it is. So as COVID-19 is monopolizing social interactions, and we're shifting to digital interaction in terms of automation and augmentation under justified terms of equity and inclusion, my strategic question is, in this period of global pandemic, could it be posed as a request to the ACM SIGCHI community to provide users, with respect to equity and inclusion, access to mastery of information literacy? I think this is a question about potential educational initiatives for SIGCHI. Does anyone have any comments on this? Or ideas?
So if I understand the question, I think they're asking for a kind of digital literacy training program. Is that your understanding as well?
I think that was my interpretation of this question. Yes, is there something SIGCHI can do to contribute to media literacy?
So I actually think that's a great question, and it's very timely and relevant. And I actually see different parts of digital literacy training. So there is the technical component, understanding how to use platforms, which platforms are most appropriate for which kinds of interaction. But there's also another component which has to do with learning critical and evaluation skills for engaging in remote interaction. And I think that's something also that's extremely important. So this also has to do with rules of the road, like what's appropriate interaction, ethics in interaction. So I think it's an extremely important idea, and I think it would be great for SIGCHI to have media information literacy. I think actually every K through 12 child around the world should have media information literacy training.
I'll also add that I think that this topic more generally, in terms of what SIGCHI should possibly be doing to sort of get, increase education and awareness of HCI kind of outside in the broader world. It's something that I hope we might talk about in the next AMA, which is about not only chapters, but also community engagement and broader outreach as well. I also think this is a really important topic. Okay, we have a question in the chat here. We on the African continent do not form part of SIGCHI's diversity efforts, and we are not part of UNIS's chapters activities. So how do you plan to address this?
So it's quite interesting, though. We've had conversations about how to improve our efforts within Africa, for instance, and other countries, other regions as well. And for instance, Gloria has made great strides to get people who are familiar with the region so that they become a bit more visible when it comes to the awards committees. And I know that we have 2 chapters at least in Africa, one in South Africa and one in, I want to say Namibia. And I think actually, I don't know what the activity levels in those chapters are. And but if we can support those activities in any way, then I would hope that units would be happy to sort of take that along, or we could see what we might, if the existing processes are not enough, then we could see what else we can do. As Casey said, I think UNIS is due for an AMA on the 23rd of November. So we could get her to address this during a bit more specifically over there as well. But personally, on a personal level, I would love to have much more activities coming in from Africa and Latin America and South Asia as well. So.
Yeah, and I can also make sure that this specific question is addressed at that next AMA as well when Eunice is here with us. And there's a suggestion in the chat that we could think about partnering with UNESCO, which is an interesting idea as well. So that is all of the questions that we have on. Let me make sure that there aren't any new ones. Oh wait, there is. Never mind. We have another question here in Slido. What is SIGCHI doing to tackle inequity in volunteering? For example, it's different for a precariously employed academic and a tenured professor to volunteer. Thoughts on this?
I can jump in if you want. Yes. I'll get it started. So, having been a non-tenured professor who then became a tenured professor, we always advise our non-tenured professors to go slow on service, because you have to focus on getting tenure. You don't want to do something that's going to distract you from getting tenure. Having said that, though, there are some volunteering activities that are less onerous than others. So as a non-tenured professor, you don't want to take on being general chair or papers chair, but there are other activities that can be done that don't take that much time and effort. Being a workshops chair or panels chair. I think I did those before I got tenure. So, it's a lot of work, but it's in a compressed period of time. So I would advise someone who's in academia, who's considering volunteering, first of all, do volunteer. It's important. But think very carefully about which role you want to take on. Being an AC is a really good opportunity for a non-tenured person to build up a research network and get to know people and get familiar with papers that are being submitted. So that's a great opportunity. So just think very carefully, ask and find out what the workload is, and don't take on anything that is high workload if you don't have tenure. Once you have tenure, yeah, you can take on whatever you like. When I was tenured and when I was general chair of CHI, it was nearly a 2-year period of work where it's almost like running a company for a couple of years. That's a lot of work. And even for a smaller conference, it's a tremendous amount of work. And I don't recommend that for someone without tenure. So, think very carefully about how much time you can give in and what role fits your interest, and never ever commit to anything that you can't carry through on.
Any other thoughts on this topic before we move on?
Yeah, I just kind of want to add that that's very good advice, by the way, Gloria. That there are big conferences and there are smaller conferences. So sometimes the size of the conference matters, because if you have a huge conference with thousands of submissions, and that's going to be a lot of work. If you have a smaller one, then maybe that'll be less work and you can start to get your feet wet. And get used to the process of volunteering, of being a part of it, and understanding how everything works. From with a smaller group or with a smaller conference, so to speak. But do volunteer. I mean, it's important, especially for including to be more diverse. We need more volunteers from all regions and all walks of life, basically.
All right, thank you. Farida, I see that you have your hand raised. I'm gonna press a button that I think will allow you to talk, but let me know if you'd rather me promote you. Oh, never mind, we can see you anyway. Yeah, do you have a question or a comment? Right now you are muted. Can you, do you have a question or a comment? All right, well, we will continue for now. Also, feel free to just type something in chat. All right. Let's see. Neha has a comment in the chat here addressed to our last question asker. Neha, do you want to just see?
Sure. I can speak. I actually was trying to figure out how I could message Anisha, and this was the only way. So I ended up messaging her and the panelists. But I think this was relevant to the question that she was asking. And so I was following up on a previous conversation around SIGCHI's efforts in Africa. And so this is, just to say that we had a conversation with Anisha, Shaima, and Melissa, who are at the, these are the 3 chapters that she mentioned in Africa. And we've been interested in looking at the formation of committees of some sort, how it makes sense to the folks that are in these locations, somewhat similar to what's been done with the Asian countries, with the Asian Development Committee in the past. And so this is an effort that is ongoing. We've been talking, I've talked a few times with Shaima and then once with Anisha and Melissa to figure out how we can have a committee that includes people from the African continent that is able to connect SIGCHI with HCI efforts within Africa. So it's been a bit slow because of COVID, and I know that there was a survey that was sent out, but I'm curious to know what the responses to that survey were. But this is probably a conversation that should be offline. So just giving that background, but also saying that maybe the details of that conversation don't need to be discussed here, but just wanted to share that it's a conversation that we are having with some folks in these chapters. I don't know if Anisha would like to follow up, but that we can also have that on the chat.
Yeah, Anisha, if you would like to say anything, either raise your hand or in the chat is fine. And also, we have a question here, which I believe is as a follow-up to a question that we just discussed earlier, which is why can't we organize a global platform for teaching and learning information literacy competencies? Is this feasible at all? So does anyone have any further thoughts on that beyond the discussion earlier?
That seems to be a question for the ops people. So I'm not sure that we're able to answer that during this session, but it's something we can certainly bring up and, talk about the feasibility of it.
Yeah, and we'll also be having an AMA with operations and accessibility in the coming weeks as well. So be on the lookout for that. That should be announced soon. Does anyone else? Let me first ask: does anyone else in the audience have any questions or comments as we? Oh, wait, I see one in Slido. All right, we've got one more. Navigating equity issues can be difficult in practice when there are conflicting needs of various minoritized groups or value systems. Can you give an example of one of the challenges that SIGCHI specifically faces when seeking increased equity, and what are some different approaches to addressing this issue? Whoever wants to go first.
I feel like, well, I'm new on the job, as is Adriana, and I want to pass the potato to Gloria to take on, but I'm not sure if, she'll appreciate that sort of passing on. But yeah, I unfortunately, I do not know. I've not had that conversation with the existing EC, but I'm sure they have been.
Adriana, do you want to add to this?
Can I get the question again? Because I don't see it.
Yeah, it's conflicting needs of various minoritized groups or value systems are difficult to navigate in practice. Can you give an example of a challenge that SIGCHI faces in seeking equity, and what are some approaches to addressing that?
Actually, I can't think of any right now again that I can think of, but I'm sure people more experienced again will have some examples. Like in my experience with the group, I don't think we had any issues with conflicting needs.
I can share one.
Oh, good.
So this is one example that came up in the survey recently, was around being sensitive to LGBTQ needs, and I think that is something something that we are split on just in terms of what people consider okay to talk about and bring up versus not. And there isn't a common understanding on what are the issues that we should be talking about, and with sort of all gender restrooms, for instance, one of the issues that someone brought up was that they wanted to have access to a safe space that was not all gender. And I think what we are increasingly recognizing is that there are good reasons to good meaning. I mean, people have reasons for being on different sides of the conversation for various reasons that are culturally situated. And what we could all be doing is perhaps generating greater awareness and then still leaning towards prioritizing a safe space for the people who feel most impacted. So that's a conversation that we did recently have on sort of conflicting interests or conflicting priorities.
Yeah, I was going to say the restroom example, that's a good one. But we also, like on the other side of it, gender neutral restrooms were introduced at some conferences. So, you know, there's many different perspectives on thinking about different values, and it's a challenge for SIGCHI to try to meet everybody's values, but you know, it's a long process. We're trying to meet these challenges, and I think we're slowly making progress, but we are completely in agreement that there are these challenges. There are many, many different perspectives. As any community becomes more heterogeneous, right? Different value systems are brought into play. And so we have to consider these and figure out how to address them. It's a long process, but we're interested in meeting these challenges.
Thank you. So we have one more question, which is great. So we have 5 minutes left.
Two, Casey, one on the Q&A and then one in the sliders.
I think the one in the Q&A we've already talked about. So let me finish with this question that we have in Slido. How does the ACM SIGCHI Executive Committee make sure that all 40 related conferences and technical program chairs are fully knowledgeable of diversity and equity issues?
I'm happy to take that. So I think in terms of the diversity and equity issues and sort of, again, it's about a lot of communication and documentation and ensuring that we can have certain policies and processes that work before going into a larger conference. So for instance, in the Interactive Media and Experience ACM IMEX conference, we have done things like introducing the concept of diversity and inclusion chairs, putting guidelines in handbooks for hosts, and ensuring that the process of inclusion is sort of introduced very early on at the beginning of the organization, and it falls through. And we're testing it out in 2021. And hopefully, if we get results from that, that we can show has a workable solution or a workable thing, then we might try to spread that across to the other conferences that are in the SIGCHI and maybe work on the sort of larger ones to include that. But yes, it is essentially about, you know, documenting the process, tracking the results, and trying to make sure that it translates to other conferences that might have slightly different contexts or slightly different ideas about what they need to make happen in their own sort of worlds.
All right, thank you. So we have just a couple of minutes left. Does anyone have any closing thoughts, comments, things to for everyone to take forward? from our panelists?
Well, I would like to add, get involved, right? So if you want to make change, be part of the change. So there's lots of opportunities for volunteering. SIGCHI is always seeking volunteers, many different types of roles that you can take on. And, you know, as I talked about, being tenured or non-tenured can help guide you in thinking about what roles to take on. So please consider volunteering and be part of the change.
Vino or Adriana?
Gloria's put it very nicely, I think. But yes, do be part of a change. But at the very least, do come and have a chat with us, converse with us, talk to us about your issues. And I mean, I can't promise to solve everything, obviously, but I do feel like conversation and having that open communication is the first step towards improving a lot of this. Obviously, we all have different backgrounds, and it would be interesting, and I'm quite passionate about hearing what yours are. So get in touch.
Yeah, and I second that, third that. And definitely do come and bring your experience and your different points of view, I think are very important for us to look at and learn from, and actually expand it and make SIGCHI more inclusive and more diverse.
All right, and I will also remind everyone that contact information for the executive committee as a whole, as well as individuals in positions, are available on the sigchi.org website under committees. So you are always welcome, obviously outside of these AMAs, to contact us if you have questions or comments. And again, our next AMA will be next Monday. I will get that announcement out very soon, and then look forward to one for accessibility and ops in the future. And in the meantime, again, please feel free to reach out to us at any point. And thank you very much for attending. This recording will also be available on YouTube in a few days after we get it professionally captioned. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice week.